Today's lesson is topic 13, lesson 4, fractions and decimals. Our objective for today is I will understand how to write fractions as decimals and decimals as fractions. First thing we need to do is review decimal place value. Write down this decimal in your notes. I read this as 56 hundredths because my 6 is in the hundredths place and the 5 is in the tenths place. So in this number, I have 5 tenths and 6 hundredths. So I read it as 56 hundredths. This is going to help us as we move into our lesson for today. Our problem of the day is, in Carter's neighborhood, 2 out of 10 kids have a basketball hoop on their driveway. How can you write 2 tenths as a decimal? Go ahead, if you haven't already, glue in your tens boxes and your hundredths boxes. First thing I want you to do is take one of your boxes. Take one of your boxes that is split into tenths, which is showing your tens rod. So each one of these boxes should have 10 tens places in them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so I have 10 there. In order to show 2 tenths, I would color in this one and this one. You should have that colored in your notes. Okay, so 2 tenths right there as a fraction is written just like this. We're going to talk about how we can take this and turn it into a decimal. We know that the tenths down here is equal to what we would refer to as our tenths place on decimal place value. Okay, so as we go into our notes, we need to have 2 tenths written as a decimal. Again, I read it as 2 tenths, so I'm going to write what I read it as. So as a decimal, I take the number that is in my numerator, because it is in the tenths place, and I put it right there in my tenths place. So the decimal for 2 tenths as a fraction is 2 tenths as a decimal. The bottom number tells you, my denominator tells me where I'm going to put it as I write it as a decimal. But in order to do that, I have to have my denominators. We're going to focus on denominators of 10 and 100 to focus on the tenths place and the hundredths place. Here's our next one we're going to try. Include this in your notes. Use the decimal models to show and write 22 hundredths as a decimal. So again, in your notes, color in 22 little boxes on your hundredths chart. So you should have 2 full rows and two full rows colored and 2 and 1 extra row, which gives us 0. We always read a decimal point as the word and. So 0 and 22 hundredths. So the last number here ends in the place value that I'm talking about. So I have 22 hundredths. It is always important for you to say the name as if there is no decimal point. So I read this just like this. I would say 22. Remember reading it, saying the name as if there's no decimal point. So 22, then say the name of the last place value spot. The last place value spot covered is the hundredths place. So therefore, I would read this as 22 hundredths. Make sure you have this right here written down in your notes. So in your notes, you should have focused on using just boxes like this. So you had 2 rows colored here, 2 and 2 small ones colored on your other one. You can continue to use your extra 2 on our example ones we're going to do in a second. It says to work with your partner, but we're going to do this on your own in your journals. It says 4/5 as a decimal, so write 4/5 as a decimal. Well, my first problem with 4/5 is I realized I haven't learned anything about a 5 in a denominator to turn into a decimal. Today, I have told you we're going to focus on turning our denominators into either tens or hundredths. So now we have a problem that we learned back in topic 12. We need to find an equivalent fraction. Remember, whatever I do to the bottom number, I have to do to the top. In order to find equivalent fractions, I either need to multiply both the top and the bottom number by the same number, or I need to divide them both by the same number. For this one, I see that I'm going from 5 to 10. I'm getting bigger, so I can't divide. I have to multiply. So now it's your job to figure out my missing spot right up here. So 5 times what gives me 10? Knowing my facts tells me that 5 times 2 equals 10. Again, whatever I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. So 4 times 2 equals 8. Now I have a fraction that I could easily turn into a decimal. So I write it as a decimal. I have an 8 in what place value? The bottom number tells me what place value. I'm again focusing on the tenths place and the hundredth place. If my denominator is a 10, that means my 8 goes in the tenths place. And I read this number as 8 tenths. This time, I want to take 80 hundredths, just like this, and turn it into a fraction. So this time I was given the decimal, and I want to make it a fraction. Well, I read it as 80 hundredths. Whatever number is in the last place value is going to tell me what my denominator is. So I said hundredths. Therefore, the bottom number must be 100. The number itself is what goes right on top as my numerator. Again, I read this as 80 hundredths. We're going to practice some in your notes right now. I want you to write each one of these fractions as a decimal. Remember that my big number over here is the whole number. It's not part of a fraction. It's part of a mixed number, so it still has to be a part of my decimal as well. But the fraction part gives me what's going to be after my decimal point. Just like I would read this mixed number as 9 and 4/10, the and tells me I can put a decimal point in there. So therefore, this has to be 9 and, so there's my decimal point, 4/10. Therefore, the 4 must be in the 10th place. Next one, 5 and 2/10. So I have a 5 as a whole number and is my decimal. 2/10. So my 2 must be in the 10th place. Last one here is my 3, so I have a whole number, and 23 hundredths. So my 3 is the last number and it lands in the 100th place. The next ones we're going to do is do the opposite. We're going to take a decimal and turn it back into a fraction. Remembering that my denominators either need to be 10 or 100. Okay, 78 hundredths. Again, you read whatever place value the last digit is in. The 8 is in the 100th place. So I read this as the number itself. So 78 hundredths. So therefore, 78 has to be over 100. The place value of the 9 here is in the tenths. So 9 tenths. So I know my bottom number is 10. Whatever number is there gives me my numerator. Last one, do on your own in your notes. Be ready for your next lesson.